contaminated. So you got to kind of think ahead as to where you're going. If you ever travel to certain countries, you can go to, there's a place at U of R called Passport Health, and you tell them where you're going, and they make a whole booklet for you, and they tell you what vaccines you may need before you go. It's very nice. It is out of pocket, though. My daughter went on a school trip to Peru for 3 weeks, and it's very expensive, but she needed a cholera vaccine and all these vaccines, and the insurance won't cover it because they say you don't have to go. But yet, if you went and didn't get vaccinated, they'd pay for your treatment. But, you know, better safe than sorry. So you go there, you get your vaccinations. It's very expensive. And then they give you a booklet on the country you're going to and all the special precautions. You know, if it's a mosquito problem, they sell you DEET, special DEET. Your primary doesn't know anything about these countries. If you call your primary and say, my kid's going to Peru, they'll say, go to Passport Health.
They're going to give you the phone number to call.
Yeah, they don't know, you know, but they don't need to know. I mean, it's, you know, every country's got different issues. But, you know, Peru is South America. It's not, I don't know, and yet there was some serious, and another thing, like when she went to Peru, and I'm sure many of you experienced this, but it was in my life, she said that wherever they stayed, they couldn't flush the toilet paper. So they had toilets that flushed, but they couldn't flush the toilet paper. They had to put it in a garbage can. That's not that sanitary. That's super. In our world, that's super not clean. But this is just Peru. I mean, so the whole world, you know, I don't know how many of you left the country, but the standards in America are pretty high. So what was Typhoid Mary about? Well, there were 53 cases of typhoid and 3 deaths attributed to Mary Malone and another guy who's not as famous as her. And he caused 122 people to become ill and 5 deaths. They basically, well, I don't know what he did, but she was a cook in Long Island for wealthy families, and she was identified as the carrier, and wherever she went, whatever home she cooked for, very wealthy people, invariably the kids died. And it created, obviously, a big firestorm. The health department hired somebody. This is a picture of her. The health department hired somebody to investigate what was the source of the outbreak, and when they figured out it was her, she would escape and then go work somewhere else under another name. And she always wanted to be a cook. Like, I don't know why she couldn't clean the houses, she cooked. So she kept leaving the bacteria in the food. I don't think it was intentional, but she was a carrier. They arrested her, and they said, if you agree to have your gallbladder removed, and then you're not shedding the bacteria anymore, we'll let you work again, and she refused. She said, you have no proof it's my gallbladder, and leave me alone. So they ended up having to put her in quarantine on an island called North Brother Island, and she lived there for 15 years, and they had her do the laundry. It was an island. I don't know who else was on this island, but there were other people. But she couldn't cook anymore because she refused to have her gallbladder. So it was a very interesting story. If you're interested, and I'm just, you know, soon you will have a few weeks off, I hope. There's a PBS movie called The Most Dangerous Woman in America.
And it was about her?
The whole thing's about her, and it's very interesting because I'm just going to play 5 minutes of it now because it's pretty cool. Just to whet your appetite, so maybe it's amazing. But why don't I have sound?
I mean, they just don't want
She didn't wash her hands. All right, we have no volume, so we're not going to watch this. But you can watch it on your own. What I liked about it, which you can kind of see here, it's done with real actors. So then they go back to, they'll have commentators, and then they actually even tell you a little bit about the germ, but then they have real footage of New York City in those days. I know, I hear it, but I can't make it louder.
Individual family, no one else in Oyster Bay, but this individual family was struck by typhoid fever, and 6 members of the household came down with the disease.
fever is extremely contagious. First, the youngest daughter became ill, then 2 maids, the mother, another daughter, and finally the gardener.
They're putting them in
How
ice.
could a disease of the
Lowers
slums
fever.
strike this wealthy community?
It wasn't the sort of area that one would expect to see typhoid, which was often associated with crowded, poor neighborhoods.
At the turn of the 20th century, the most crowded neighborhood in the world is New York City's Lower East Side. It's even more crowded than Calcutta. With few connections to city water or sewer, the tenements lack even basic sanitation. Infectious diseases like smallpox, diphtheria, tuberculosis, and typhoid fever kill thousands each year.
Typhoid fever was a fairly common visitor in New York City and in other urban areas, especially in the 19th century and in the early part of the 20th century. In New York City alone, there were about 4,000 new cases of typhoid fever every year.
The symptoms of typhoid can be severe. Weeks of fever, headache, diarrhea, delirium. 1 out of 10 dies of the disease.
When people had typhoid fever in the early 20th century and there were no antibiotics, doctors had to just treat the symptoms.
But the cause of the disease is no longer a mystery. 30 years earlier, scientist Louis Pasteur electrified the world by proving that bacteria, microbes invisible to the naked eye, cause disease. Typhoid fever comes from Salmonella typhi, bacteria that grow in the intestinal tract and are shed in the feces. In 1892, New York City set up the country's first bacteriology laboratory devoted to public health.
The new science, the new bacteriology, was tremendously exciting. This focused on what can we see under the microscope, what can we do once we diagnose people with specific diseases, what can we do to prevent this from being spread to other people.
In Oyster Bay, where even President Teddy Roosevelt summers, the threat of a typhoid epidemic is terrifying.
Everybody started looking around for an explanation. They started looking for the usual suspects. Let's find the dirty, the poor, maybe some bad dairy, the lady on the beach who sells shellfish. It's got to be one of them.
Experts are called in to investigate. They know typhoid fever is caused by contaminated food or drink. They suspect the plumbing in the house and put dye in the toilet to see if it contaminates the drinking water. It doesn't. They check the local shellfish to see if the bay is polluted with sewage. It isn't. They examine the milk supply in case it is contaminated. It too is free of bacteria. The source of the outbreak remains a mystery. Though the Oyster Bay victims recover, a cloud of disease hangs over the house.
The family who owned the house, the Thompsons, were afraid if they didn't get to the bottom of this, they would never be able to rent their house again.
That winter, the Thompsons learn about a freelance civil engineer known for his ability to track down the source of disease. 37-year-old George Soper is confident and ambitious.
By 1907, I had a great deal of experience with typhoid fever. As an undergraduate, I had the temerity to move typhoid patients and their families out of a house that had a long history of communicable diseases, and with the consent of the owner, burn it to the ground.
Okay.
George Soper.
So, I thought this movie was great. It combines live action, with actors, and then you get to see Typhoid Mary. But it's funny, they make her this beautiful woman, which is different than, not that, Judge here. Like she doesn't look like like this in the movie, okay? She looks like Emma Thompson or something, you know, like some redheaded Irish young lass. She's running around the house screaming, "You can't catch me, you can't catch me." So, yes.
When is the last time you were here at typhoid? The last time in CDC was like a typhoid fever in America, in the United States.
Well, was it on that graph? There was a graph of typhoid.
No, I'm just
Oh.
asking. There is any more recently or no?
This is typhoid fever in 1934. So it's pretty much eradicated in America, but I'm sure if you go to the CDC.gov website, there may be a few cases a year, but honestly, I couldn't tell you. But that's, you know, all due to the sewage treatment and all that stuff. So again, if you're interested, the video is called "The Most Dangerous Woman in America." When I went to PBS to look at it, you can't, it's not free anymore. Anyway, so, but if you go to YouTube, it's there for free. But it's called "The Most Dangerous Woman in America." So that is, cholera is another disease of the intestines. And what's key about that is when someone has cholera, which again you get from contaminated water, they say that the feces looks like it has rice in it, and the rice is actually clumps of bacteria. That's how much bacteria is being shed. So they use this term rice water stool. There's a picture of the bacteria at the bottom right. It's a Vibrio cholera. Vibrio, remember what shape that was? Like a comma, and that's comma-shaped bacteria down there. This disease kind of gained a little more publicity. And by the way, notice 1% mortality if it's treated versus 50% if it's not treated. Treatment is mostly oral rehydration therapy. Countries reporting cholera still exist. Central America, Africa, Asia, India. So it's totally not gone. This is as of 2015. There was a big epidemic in South America in 1991. They said that 1 million cases occurred and 9,600 deaths. So if you go to South America, you need to get a cholera vaccine. They said that this occurred, and this is why world travel is wonderful but dangerous at the same time. There was a ship that was carrying seafood, and the ballast water, you know what that is? It's like the water that they take on to help it balance or whatever. Don't ask me to say anything more about that. They picked up the water in Asia, and then when they got to Peru, they dumped the water, and that was enough to contaminate the water in Peru. And it resulted in over 1 million cases and 9,600 deaths as it spread throughout the whole country. And it lasted for a few years. So for a few years, and even to today, you need a cholera vaccine if you go to South America.
So cholera is just in their water now?
Well, it's better now, but yeah, it's still there because it's a very poor country. You know, it's not everywhere, but the other time it reached the news was in Haiti when they had the big earthquake in 2010. They believe that a United Nations peacekeeping force, one person from Nepal had cholera, and it contaminated all the water in Haiti after the earthquake. And there have been over 7,500 deaths and 500,000 cases, and they actually traced it all back to one UN peacekeeping guy from Nepal. In 2014, after there was this flooding, there was a cholera outbreak in Mexico. There are 2 vaccines, but they say they don't work well if the outbreak is already underway, and people aren't routinely vaccinated. But again, if you travel to these countries, you can get a cholera vaccine. The best way to prevent it is chlorinated water, soap, and hand washing. Okay, we'll skip my fun song for now. E. coli is normally harmless. It's in your gut as we speak, but there are pathogens pathogenic strains, and the pathogenic strains have fimbria that allow them to bind to your intestines. So the ability to attach allows them to gain a foothold, and then they often make toxins. And the toxins upset the water balance so that more water floods the colon, and then you have diarrhea. And that's basically what diarrhea is. The water that's in your body is incorrectly sent to the large intestine, and you get too much water in there. The toxins often upset the water balance regulation across the the sodium and chloride channels and all that stuff. There are 5 different strains that cause gastroenteritis. I kind of cleaned this up a little today, so if yours looks a little different, you don't have to remember all these kinds. There's only one that I want you to kind of remember, but there are 5 different types. Some are responsible more for certain diarrheas in certain countries. Most of them make a toxin called the Shiga toxin, which is named after Shigella, which gives you dysentery also. But the one that's just affected our romaine lettuce is the enterohemorrhagic one, which is also known as O157H7. So that is a problem because it says 2 to 3% of feedlot cattle may have it in their intestines, and the cow is healthy. So it's not like this, it's a sick cow. And they said almost 90% of ground meat is contaminated with it, but at a low level. But again, if you mistreat your ground meat and let it sit on a counter, a low level can become a higher level in a few hours. So leaving things on the counter is not a good idea. How does all the cows can get contaminated? Because after they kill the cow, they dump them in a big vat of hot water, and so now that big vat of hot water gets contaminated. So then the next cow that gets dumped in the hot water gets contaminated even if he didn't have it. So this is how, they say that one hamburger that you buy, like Wegmans, where it's sent in as ground meat, can have 100 cows in it. You're not eating one cow, because everything's on a big scale. So this is the problem. And again, ground meat more than a steak, because a steak, even if it's rare, you kill the germs on the surface. It's when you grind it up and mix it up and then eat a rare hamburger, then the bacteria aren't killed in the center. And then there's also cross-contamination. So why are, like alfalfa sprouts, you can't even buy that anymore on a sandwich. I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, people used to like alfalfa sprouts on a sandwich, that little light thing. It's too dangerous. You can't wash them, and there's no way to get the germ off of it. So nobody sells alfalfa sprouts anymore. You certainly can't get it on a sandwich.
How big a difference are they in green sprouts?
It's a big enough difference. Yeah, because they're really delicate and stuff. So something about the processing, it just ruins them. Any kind of raw spinach, lettuce, the romaine lettuce, you can't wash this off. It's stuck on there. So even those cleaners they sell, they're really a waste of money. There's no way to get it off if it's on there. How did it get on there? Because wherever there's vegetables growing, somewhere nearby, there's cows being grown for food, and the poop accumulates and it runs off into the streams and rivers and et cetera, et cetera. So that's why, like Chipotle had a problem for a couple of years. Every other week there was another outbreak. Yeah, they had a celery issue. Their salsa was contaminated. The big risk with this kind of E. coli is it can cause hemolytic uremic syndrome. 5 to 10% of children who get this progress to it and have 5% mortality, and if they survive, they might need a kidney transplant. It makes a toxin that destroys the kidneys. So it's called hemolytic uremic syndrome, and there's 200 to 500 deaths annually. Robin Cook, he writes like scientific novels, wrote a book called Toxin, if you want to read it. It's many years old, but it was about this. I mean, this is not new. And it was about how the guy in the book took his kid to McDonald's, and he knew that the burger should be well cooked. And the burger was well cooked. But his kid got this anyway because in the back where they were cooking it, a frozen burger fell on the burger that his kid was going to eat. So even though the burger his kid was going to eat was well cooked, it had gotten contaminated by the frozen burger that was flipped kind of you know, touching it, and then the guy goes, oh, and he put it back over there. But the cooked one didn't continue to be cooked enough to kill the germ. So it's an interesting, you know, story about the situation. And basically, we're growing way too many animals in big industrialized ways that contaminate a lot of animals where only a few might have actually been infected.
You said raw spinach. Is that actually pretty dangerous?
It's as dangerous as raw romaine lettuce. It's all susceptible. And then that's why when the caveman discovered fire, he said, let's cook it. Because cooking kills germs.
Is salad risky?
Salad is riskier nowadays. It never used to be. I eat it, and I'm not going to stop. But, you know, I'm healthy. I have a good immune system, blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the cow industry has ruined the vegetable industry. It's not the vegetables' fault. We always used to say vegetarians had lower rates of food poisoning. Because in those days, you would get food poisoning by eating the contaminated chicken or beef. Now you're getting it on the vegetables because of the runoff of the mounds of manure. They don't know what to do with the cow food. Anybody can figure that out? Nobel Prize. Traveler's diarrhea is also something that people get a lot, and you get it sometimes by E. coli or salmonella or other bacteria, and just as a note of surprise, a lot of times people wouldn't think of it, but Pepto-Bismol is actually antibacterial. It's not like Tums, you know, like sometimes you might be like, oh, what's the difference? The bismuth is a chemical in it. It's called bismuth salicylate. It's actually antibacterial. So if you take Pepto-Bismol like a week before you travel to a country, you may prevent having traveler's diarrhea. It's as a preventative and a treatment. Yep. Yep. Campylobacter, here's the good news. Almost all retail chickens are contaminated and the chicken's not sick. Now, why people don't get sick so much from chicken compared to beef is simply why. You cook it more, right? Nobody eats or tries to eat rare chicken. Chicken is generally cooked well, but again, if you don't, it's on the chicken. Almost all retail chickens have Campylobacter. It's the leading cause of foodborne illness. 60% of cattle excreted in the feces and milk. So again, that runoff from the cow poop can contaminate water.
Did they call it jejunum because it's affecting the jejunum and the...
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. 2 million cases annually. Cook chicken thoroughly and don't drink raw milk. Only pasteurized. Usually oral rehydration therapy is enough. And again, don't forget, like sometimes people go, well, it couldn't have been the chicken that got me sick because we all ate the chicken. But you never know if your piece has more on it for some reason, especially if you're at a restaurant. You don't know what's in the back, what's going on. This one has just not a big deal to remember, but 1 in 1,000 cases get Guillain-Barré syndrome 3 weeks after eating the food. That's like a paralysis where you have very bad weakness for several months. And they say that another thing Campylobacter can trigger is other autoimmune diseases like inflammatory bowel disease and a reactive arthritis that can occur weeks after you get Campylobacter. So it's like the body's attempt to get rid of the Campylobacter. Several weeks later, people might get inflammatory bowel disease or arthritis in joints far away, like in your knee, and then you go to the doctor and you wouldn't think it's connected to the fact that you had food poisoning 3 weeks ago, but it can. It's very interesting if you read more about it. Ulcers. When I was growing up, what do you think people thought ulcers were caused by? Stress. Some people used to say spicy food, which is the silliest thing. I could almost buy stress, although a lot of stressed people don't have ulcers. But most of the world eats spicy food and doesn't have ulcers, right? Asia eats a ton of spicy food. I mean, that's... So it turns out that 30 to 50% of the population in the developed world gets infected with Helicobacter pylori. It's got a cool flagella on it. And that bacteria makes, in some people, 15%, ulcers because the bacteria makes an enzyme called urease, and urease converts urea to ammonia, and that raises the pH of the stomach. So this bacteria literally can grow in the stomach itself. So normally here's like all this mucus here, but Helicobacter makes urease, which ends up increasing the pH of the stomach, and then the bacteria get rid of the mucus layer and they erode a hole in here. And that's called an ulcer. So ulcers are really due to bacterial infection, not stress, not spicy food. Now, if you have an ulcer and you eat spicy food, it might hurt it more. It's like if I have a blister on my shoe and I wear bad shoes, it's gonna hurt more because I already have a wound there. But the spicy food didn't cause the ulcer, nor did the stress.
Well, why do they always tell you that?
Because they didn't know. It wasn't until, I don't know the year exactly, I think it was 1995, Barry Marshall won the Nobel Prize. Nobody believed him that Helicobacter causes ulcers, and he was from Australia, and he did something that like you would never want anybody ever to do, and he was banging his head against the wall. Nobody believed him. He drank the bacteria, and within 2 days he was rushed to the hospital with gastritis, and it was only then that people paid attention to him. And this was like 1995. He and his partner won a Nobel Prize for discovering that bacteria cause ulcers. And it changed and revolutionized the whole treatment, because now you need tetracycline and Pepto-Bismol for 2 to 3 weeks and you're cured. So people who spent their whole life suffering from ulcers were cured. People with type O blood, for some reason, are more susceptible to this. And the reason you want to cure yourself of this is because if you don't cure yourself of this, it happens to be a carcinogenic bacteria, and you're about 2 to 6 times more likely to get stomach cancer if you've had this. So even if you don't have an ulcer from it, if they found out you carried it, they like to treat you for it because it can cause stomach cancer. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Now there's a little video at this URL, but I couldn't get it because MCC took off our player, that Adobe player or whatever. We can't download it for security reasons. So if you're interested and you go home, there's a 2-minute video on the bacteria and how does it cause ulcers at this URL. It comes from the other people. And you can transmit it to like people you sleep with, or, you know, so people in the same household sometimes carry it. And then we have our famous C. diff, right? C. diff we've talked about a lot. It's Clostridium difficile associated diarrhea. And this is basically where people, you probably have the spores of this already in their colon, but the spores don't germinate because of competing bacteria. But then when you take antibiotics for any reason whatsoever, you kill the competing bacteria, and now the spores can germinate. It's associated with hospitalized patients, nursing home residents, but the risk following an operation for which a prophylactic antibiotic was given to prevent infection is 21 times greater now than it was a decade ago. Because the bacteria is now in the community, it's more widespread. So people, you can go to a doctor for a sinus infection, get antibiotics, and 3 weeks later you got C. diff. It's not just hospital acquired like the old days. You get inflammation of the colon, fever, blood, pus. It can be life-threatening. 500,000 cases reported, 29,000 deaths within 30 days of diagnosis. So people need to be treated, and the treatment is metronidazole, sometimes other drugs as well, and discontinue the antibiotics that started the whole problem to begin with. If that doesn't work, everybody knows what they do. Yeah. Okay, just so you know, this is like pseudomembrane colitis, like you're looking at a colon here, and then this is also, so I'm no pathologist, but I guess this isn't good, these little spots. I'm not gonna pretend the treatment is a fecal transplant. Yeah, everybody's heard of that? Fecal transplant is when they, if the drug doesn't help and the person is still suffering, and they're really suffering, people sometimes like they can't leave their house. They have like 20 bowel movements a day. They can't go anywhere. This is diarrhea. if the drugs don't work to cure it, they're starting to do something where you get the freeze-dried feces from healthy donors in a pill form, and you either take it orally, or they can actually give you an enema of rehydrated feces from healthy people, and then that colonizes your colon, and it eliminates the C. diff. It's disgusting, but if you're suffering, it's a lifesaver. And that's not the first line of what they do, but that is kind of the last resort, and it has worked tremendously.
So, do they have people donate healthy food?
Sometimes it comes from family members.
I just wondered if it's like a public one donating.
Yeah, I don't know if you're right. Okay, last disease here is the viral disease. You don't usually think of the mumps as a GI tract disease, but the mumps virus actually infects your salivary glands. So salivary glands are part of your digestive system, right? The saliva donates amylase, which digests starch in the mouth. So the mumps virus is one of those diseases we don't see much because it's prevented with the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. The virus does infect the glands, makes it very swollen, and usually you recover no problem, but the complication is it can infect ovaries and testicles and lead to sterility, and it can also lead to encephalitis and pancreatitis. Here's a girl, this is a salivary gland that's swollen. This guy, you see, he's kind of puffy on this side. So before vaccination in '67, there were over 200,000 cases a year. And then, since then, it's been very low, but in 2006, there was a big spike because they realized that they needed to give you guys boosters. So to go to college, you had to get a booster of your MMR. Because again, it wanes because nobody gets naturally boosted anymore. And then they said in 2016, there were 3,000 cases. This is also due to people that don't vaccinate. Well, when you go to college, they were supposed to be like a requirement. I don't know.
I think we could choose to decline if you were aware of
If you had a record that you had it before, you didn't need to. It may be because your age. No, no offense. I'm old. I had measles. I had mumps. I had rubella. I was born before '67, so we had these diseases.
Wow.
Clearly, I
Why did
recovered.
They used to tie your head up when people had mumps?
Did they? I don't remember.
Yeah, they
Tie your
used to tie your shit up with.
maybe ice to soothe the.
So your glands
I
don't
don't
fall out.
know.
Just kidding. Just to finish up that norovirus we mentioned, it's a very common viral gastroenteritis. Very short incubation period, which is why it ruins so many people's cruises. Because if you get on a 10-day cruise and you get sick on day 1, you pick it up, you'll be sick on day 3. You know, it'd be nice if it had a 2-week incubation period and you didn't get sick till you got home. But if you get on a ship and you pick it up off of a fomite, you can get sick and it ruins the whole ship. Some of the ships have actually returned to port because so many people were vomiting and diarrhea, they just said, oh, forget it, this is no fun for anybody. And then they have to take the ship into dry dock and they literally disinfect it for like 3 to 4 days. But if you ever did take a cruise, you'll notice there's an awful lot of cleaning going around. A lot of the staff are constantly wiping the stair rails, and before you go to the dining hall, you have to get your Purell dripped into your hand, and they're very, you can't get through that lady. She makes everybody get a big flop of Purell.